Now that we know what a computer actually is, let us discuss the second topic of this video, and that is the story of two best friends, hardware and software. So, be it a desktop, laptop, or smartphone, all these kind of computers is made up of two components, and that is hardware and software. So, the big question now is, what is a hardware? The first point says that hardware is any physical components of a computer. Now, when we say a physical component, it means something that can be seen, touched, and felt. Just like all these electronic devices which you can see over here. All these are nothing but hardware. You can see it, and when you can see it, you can touch it and feel it. Now, the second point says computer hardware consists of interconnected electronic devices. So, it generally means that all these hardware devices, be it the monitor, be it a mouse, this is something which is called a storage drive, where you store files like your movies, text, and anything like that. This is something called a RAM, and this is the brain of a computer system, the CPU. So what the second point is trying to say us is that all these hardware devices are interconnected in some way or the other, and that helps to control computer operations, input and output. Now, the question that comes to our mind is that who helps them to interconnect this different physical hardware components? And the answer to this is something known as a motherboard. So this is where all the physical components which you are able to see in this image is going to get connected. Now, the third point says all these different kind of hardware, as you can see in this image, can be installed inside and connected to the outside of a computer. Now, the question that comes is, how do we decide what is inside and what is outside? Well, the answer to that is the motherboard. Any component such as the CPU over here, the RAM over here, the storage driver over here is installed into this motherboard, and other devices like a monitor or a mouse is connected with the help of a wire to a specific port in the motherboard. Now, the examples for hardware are input devices, core components, and output devices. Well, just hang on a bit. Yeah, these two examples, the input devices and the output devices, are something that is connected to the outside of a computer. And when we say connected to the outside of a computer, it generally means connected via a port to the motherboard. And the core components like the CPU, the RAM, the storage drive is installed inside this motherboard. let us now discuss about input devices. So an input device is basically a hardware. So these input devices like the mouse, the keyboard, what it does is that it allows the user to input something known as a data. Once the computer gets this data, the data travels all the way from input device to something called a RAM, and then from the RAM it travels to the CPU, and this is where the actual processing of the input data takes place. And the examples for input devices can be a keyboard, a mouse, a gaming pad, or even a microphone. Moving forward, let us now discuss about output devices. So an output device is also a hardware, but what it does is that it converts the information into a human readable form. But who gives this information to the output device? And the answer to that is the CPU. Once the CPU gets done with the processing of data, it then dumps the processed data into something known as the RAM, and then from the RAM this information gets consumed by the output devices and gets converted into a human readable form. The information can be some textual data or some graphics like images and things like that, images, animations, right? And then audio, like whenever you are listening to some music, and then video which gets rendered into a monitor. Now the example for output devices are monitor, which is used to display anything like textual or some graphics or things like that. And then there is something known as printer, which is used to print textual information into a paper. And then we have something called a speaker, which is used to output the music files.